Welcome to the Experience of the Soul podcast with Cynthia Alice Anderson, a weekly show helping you grow, prosper, and evolve. Today, episode 338, The Law of Surrender. And now, Experience of the Soul.
Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to the Experience of the Soul podcast. I am here today in the studio with my wonderful producer.
Wonderful. You're wonderful. I know
It's
we do this every time.
wonderful.
Oh, nice. You got a little song to go along with it.
It's marvelous.
That you should care for me. I think we can sing those songs. Those are old songs, right?
Yeah. It's got to be, what do you call it, public domain by now?
Yeah, over 100 years old.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Experience of the Soul podcast. This is episode 338, week 6 of our 7-week series on the incredible, I would say, life-altering book, 7 Spiritual Laws of Release. Yeah, of course, available on Kindle and in paperback on Amazon. Get your copy today. And today we are talking about the law of surrender. So, of course, this is going to be all about the powerful act of trusting the divine, right? Whenever we surrender, we're aligning ourselves with the essence of God. Of course, this is a very transformative practice, and we are very excited to explore that in today's episode. But before we get to it, as always, some shout outs that we would like to do, starting with Facebook user and friend Terry Wolski, friend from Unity North Tampa. So hope you're doing well, Terry.
Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, Sean. Yeah, thanks for listening, Terry. I'm like, okay, Sean, it's me now. No, I'm kidding, of course. I didn't mean to interrupt. Sometimes there's a little bit of a lag. So anyway, thank you for what you shared. And I just wanted to say a personal hi to Terry. And Terry, it means the world to me that you're listening. All the best to you and Rich. And I appreciate the part you played on my journey as well. And what a blessing you are, my friend. And we also want to do a shout out to a place I've been many, many times in Kansas.
Yeah, Prairie Village,
Kansas. And to all my friends, I bet I have some friends from Unity of Overland Park, where I worked during ministerial school, and so many friends still there. So thank you for listening. And if I didn't know you there, reach out and let me know where you're listening from and who you are. I'd love to know more about you, simply so I could lift you up, hold you in the light, and just see all good. I just love to make a personal connection when I can. And I'll tell you what, Sean, as my reach is growing now, as the book is on Amazon, sometimes it's overwhelming to think about all the people that might be listening around the world. And frankly, friends, I'm honored. And if I could know each of you by name, I would. And I'm working my way there. So thank you for the part you're playing in the success of our show. I thank you all for listening. I thank you all for financially supporting. That's how we stay on the air. So thank you for listening, my friends, and happy to have you along with us.
Absolutely. And as a reminder, we do try to make it as easy as possible for you to reach out to us and let us know where you're listening from and who you are. It would no matter what podcast platform you are on, head to the show notes and you will see send us a text message. Simply click on that. It will open your text threads and you can write us a little note and hit send and it'll come directly to us. So we look forward to hearing from you. And
remember, it makes our day when you do that.
It does.
Totally.
It really does. We get so excited. We share it with each other. We're like, oh, did you see? Somebody
Did you see? Somebody loves us. Somebody out there loves us.
Yeah, so please do. So with that, friends, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Welcome officially to episode 338 of the Experience of the Soul podcast. 7 Spiritual Laws of Release, the Law of Surrender.
Wow, friends, this is a big one. Wow. I often chuckle at the title simply because I know what went into the writing of the book, and I know the many, many experiences that I have had that have led to my understanding of it, and also know my understanding will increase over time, as I know yours will, as you practice the principle, as you put the principle into practice in your life and in your world. And today, the law of surrender, I don't know, there's so many things I want to say about it. And first of all, I want to talk about how I hear about this law in the culture at large. And here's what I want to say. I hear a lot of people talking about spiritual things that like read a book about it sometime and think they know what it means. And here's what I mean. A lot of people talk about surrender as giving up. Some people talk about it as giving in. Some people say, "Oh yeah, man, when you're on the spiritual journey, surrender is just going with the flow." And not exactly. Not exactly. So here's what I mean. I've had people come to my office and say, "Well, my spiritual practice right now is I just say yes to everything that shows up." And I said, "Well, tell me more about that." Well, if this happens, if that happens, I say yes. Yeah, but what if you're supposed to say no? So I hear people kind of abdicating responsibility and saying, if I just say yes, that means I'm in the flow of God's good. And it's like, well, maybe, maybe, but maybe not. Because sometimes we have a strong guidance to stand up to something. Sometimes we might be let's say a group of friends is going to go do a certain thing that we know is not in alignment with our highest good. We don't want to say no to that. And what several people have described to me as surrender is, well, I'm just going to go with the flow of life. If somebody says, "Do you want to do this?" I just say yes. But what if spiritually you need to say no? So surrender is not giving up or giving in, and it's not simply saying yes to everything that comes along your path. So please keep that in mind. So if it's not that, what is it? What is it? Well, really, the law of surrender is about being in a state of non-resistance, but it is anything but passive. Being in a state of non-resistance takes a great deal of emotional and spiritual fortitude. It takes a lot of thought to recognize when there are things of the ego or personality that are pulling you, and whether it's spirit. And the idea with surrender is the very great prayer that Jesus prayed, "Not my will, thy will be done." And for anyone who thinks that's going with the flow of life, they're not paying attention, right? So just going along with whatever happens. No, thy will be done is a prayer of the heart and soul. It is a prayer of, I'm not sure what to do, but I know my will is not the right way. In other words, I'm going to trust the divine at a high level, the highest level I know. And rather than trying to force my own way, I'm going to flow with God. So there's that word flow. But again, sometimes flowing with God is going to be the opposite of what everybody else is doing. And that's what I mean by be careful about just saying yes to everything. Because not everything that comes along your journey is for your highest good. And that's where the discernment piece comes. So the surrender is not to life and everything in it. The surrender is to God. And God is the guiding force of your life. So that's why I really want to differentiate that. So it's not my will, thy will be done is the prayer, or rather the law of surrender in action. It's the prayer that Jesus prayed. God, not my will, thy will be done. In other words, on the human level, Jesus said, I don't want to do this. On the human level, this is hard, but to surrender to God, it must be done. Well, we know with Jesus, yes, we know Jesus first died, but then we know he resurrected. It's the greatest story in history. We're still talking about it over 2,000 years later. So to surrender to the divine will of God in our lives is truly a spiritual mastery in that moment, because it's like saying and understanding that the personal will, or the personality self, which is very limited and is all about saving itself, is the opposite of what we're speaking of when it comes to surrender. Surrender is living from the soul. Surrender is living from this highest spiritual nature that we are. So I describe in the book that for me, somebody who's really following this idea that not my will, thy will be done. To an outsider, it might look as if they're kind of marching to the beat of a different drummer. A lot of times when I was growing up, if that was said about somebody, that was seen almost not necessarily as negative, but saying they were a very unique individual. And I know for myself, in a group of ministers at times, sometimes I feel like I'm going to the beat of a different drummer. And for me, that simply means I'm walking through life and through my spiritual life in a very unique way, and that I'm interested every day in not my will, thy will be done. And that can be a tug of war at times, because the personality self, to be in front of people, to do a podcast, to put your voice out in a book and in words all over the world, you have to have a certain amount of self-confidence, or you'd never be able to do those things. But if you let that self-confidence get out of control, then it becomes an ego push, and you don't want to do that. So, every single day I'm learning to flow not with the outer, but to flow with God. And in my book on page 106, I'm going to have Sean read this. But basically, when I think of a soul of flowing with God and into God, the image I see in my mind's eye is like a small tributary into a larger body of water. So, Sean, will you read this kind of imagery that I feel?
Absolutely. The water is flowing and beautiful as it shimmers in the twilight. The last rays of the sun dance on the surface as it moves over rocks and brambles and makes twists and turns and heads out into the larger river. There, in joining the river, the two become one, and there is no other. The tributary and the river, those were once seemingly two, are now one.
Yes. Yes. So we're like that little tributary. Yes. We're like that little individuation of God. And I love this idea because it really affirms God's place in my life and in my world, and that I am holy, and that God loves me, and that I've never been disconnected from God. I was saying to my son the other day, I'm not sure why there was something going on. It may have been about some of the like ice caps that are melting. And I said, well, that'll eventually reach here. And my son said, what do you mean? I said, well, all the water on the earth is connected. We can't see it, but it's all connected. So what happens in the Pacific Ocean ends up in the Atlantic, and vice versa. What happens in a creek ends up in a lake, ends up in a river, ends up in the ocean, ends up in another stream. And so these are images. As many of you know, I love to be outside, and these images really help me understand my relationship to the larger whole, and certainly my relationship to God. So it's like, what if we knew we were just this little part that is wanting to know our true nature, to just flow into God? And this is the idea I like. I like this idea that I could be so connected to the divine that as I'm doing God's will, that the two become one. And I have moments of that, friends, but I still have to work every day on not being in resistance. And by work, I really mean that. Somebody's going to say, oh, well, just be in the isness of the allness of the oneness. No, non-resistance is an effort, even though it sounds like an oxymoron. Non-resistance is a conscious choice, because it's pretty normal as humans to resist what's best for us. Have you noticed that so often we know what's good for us? I have people tell me all the time that are on a health journey, say, I don't know why I ate that. I know it's bad for me. And I go, yeah, it tastes good, and they're like, I know, right? It tastes too good. And I said,
boy, can I relate to that?
Am I right, Sean? We all do it, right?
Yeah, big time.
I know I should go out, but instead I'm going to stay in front of the TV and eat bonbons.
Right. Because sometimes that feels just as good.
Well, only for the moment.
No, not really. Only later, for the moment, temporarily.
Right.
Yes.
And then later we're like, why did I do it?
Shouldn't have done that.
Right.
Should've went to the gym.
And so to me, this is all like the spiritual journey too. It's like, okay, I know I'm supposed to surrender to God's will, but maybe I know better this time. And I have one of my dear friends, and he's been a student a long time. He always quotes me. He goes, "Yeah, but remember, Cynthia Alice, the ego's wrong, but only 100% of the time." And I go, "Exactly, it's only 100% wrong." But there's some way we trick ourselves into it, and so moving into surrender, this not this place of non-resistance. Ultimately, it is a free place to be, but again, to get to that consciousness is a work. I don't think anybody wakes up and goes, "Great, I'm going to be non-resistant to God's will." I mean, when even Jesus had a hard time with it, friends, I think to think that it's just about easy and going with the flow and doing whatever, saying yes to whatever shows up, you're really not paying attention to what the masters have told us about forgiveness, and even this week that I'm speaking of, surrender. So, to me, surrender is about being in your higher purpose, because none of us really want to just work, pay taxes, and die. We all want to live from this understanding of higher purpose. And I just heard, he's very well known, Tim Tebow, the other day in an interview, and he's done a lot, to raise awareness for human trafficking and everything. And he was, I can't remember how the interviewer got there in the question, but the question was, who wants to just work for a living? He said, I want to live my purpose, because if I'm working for a living, I'm exhausted all the time. I'm frustrated. But if you are living your purpose, your work is a joy. It doesn't really feel like work. It's why for me, sometimes I have to literally plan time off, because I love my work so much that I do it all the time. So yeah, we want to live from this place of purpose, from this place of non-resistance, and to know that this is living from this higher energy. In other words, asking God, what is your will here? I had made a decision recently that my ego was fighting a little bit. And every time I prayed about it, it was like, no, this is the way you are to handle it. And the guidance, the awareness was clear. Even after I got the guidance, the next couple days, Spirit was, giving me signs and giving me awarenesses about what was next for me. So, friends, it is very, very important to listen and to, pay attention to all the signs and, the guidance that we are receiving. So, I kind of use the words I wanted to mention. I kind of use the words non-resistance and surrender almost interchangeably. So don't let that trip you up. It's like, well, I thought we were talking about surrender. Yet we are. And for me, surrender is being in a state of non-resistance. And, I've worked with a lot of people in recovery over the years, and I myself have attended a lot of Al-Anon meetings, and I've attended AA meetings with friends and family members who have gotten sober. I just celebrated with a friend who celebrated 50 years of sobriety, and I was so happy to be there to support her and everything. And but when I first learned of surrender and in the 12 steps, I first thought it was giving up. I said, well, it feels like when we talk about surrender, am I just saying I'm giving up and I'm not helping the person drinking or using anymore? And it's like, no, it's not really giving up, but it's realizing, it's like the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. In other words, it's allowing somebody to do what they do and me to work on what is mine to work on, which is to be in God, which is to flow with God. And I don't have to resist somebody else's drinking, but I don't have to be around it either, And so that was a lesson for me, that I could be in surrender for my own self and my own life, and not surrender to their behavior, but do what I needed to do to take care of myself as God guided. So it wasn't giving up on them, but it was saying, well, they're living their journey. How do I want to live my journey? How do I want to listen to God? How do I want to do God's will? If I could totally be in a state of non-resistance, because even if I'm trying to get the alcoholic to stop drinking or stop using, drug addict to stop using, I'm resisting them. And it's not my job to make somebody else quit drinking. My job is to align with God. And you can't make somebody quit anyway. So, see, I was resisting reality and therefore resisting God even. So, this idea of surrender and non-resistance is super, super deep as you start relating it to life, as you start relating it to friends and family members. Like you'll have a friend say or do something, and you think, "Gosh, what do I do here?" Don't jump in and try to fix it and mold it, and sometimes it's to hold quiet, hold steady, and look at yourself and say, God, what is your highest will here? So I just want to bring into your awareness that on a regular basis, the outside world is saying resist, resist, resist. And I think being in the state of non-resistance is truly, truly a higher spiritual consciousness. One of the things, so there's several old Unity authors I love. One is Imelda Shanklin. There's another one, Georgiana Tree West. But in my book on page 109, there is there's a phrase or a little reading from Imelda Shanklin, because she has a whole chapter on non-resistance. I bet you I've read that chapter, I don't know, 20 or 30 times at least over the years. And one of the things she says is non-resistance is not the line of least resistance. By following the line of least resistance, you may be able temporarily to evade a responsibility, but no responsibility can forever be avoided. If the thing is disagreeable in contemplation, cease to contemplate it. Go out to meet it, serenely non-resistant. In other words, we have to meet the situation with our higher self and not with our ego and personality. And to know that anything that's happening, if it's bringing up pain or it's bringing up discomfort, there's something there for us for our growth journey. There's something there that is trying to teach us to learn, to grow through this situation. And so if we avoid it, like I was saying earlier, just avoiding things or just going, yes, 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 all's well, you're not really dealing with what it is. And so if you feel a resistance, the thing to do is to check that out and then, contact God, ask for divine will be done in you, and then go out to that situation and seek to bring this God energy in and through. And this can happen through, personal relationships, through work relationships, through, the guy that does work on your house, or is, you're in the midst of a construction project and you want to go, how long is this going to take? That's being really resistant, but by avoiding it, you're not solving it either. So you learn to get this non-resistant consciousness on board, then go deal with it. Yeah, then go deal with it. And it was funny the other day, Sean, I don't think I told you this, but I had taken an elderly friend of mine out for Veterans Day. And, it was a great day, but every veteran that was known to man was there getting a free sandwich. And it was great. And I didn't mind the traffic and everything. But then as I was leaving, people started, there were big lines and everything. And so I was waiting patiently and I was in the flow and I was non-resistant. And pretty soon people started coming into my lane. And boy, that non-resistance went right out the window, and I couldn't surrender anymore. My ego got the best of me. And I said to myself, well, but you know what? I had to meet that in some way. I wish I could have stayed in non-resistance more, because boy, I lost my cool. And I can't remember the last time that happened in traffic, but I just could not hold on to that non-resistance with people literally breaking the law just to get around. It was just strange, and I couldn't do what I needed to do. So, we're all human, and we all have these moments where we go dip down in the personality and go, oh gosh, why did I do that? It's called normal life. But we just don't want to stay there, And so the idea of surrender is we return to that place of surrender, on a regular basis. often I have found that just simply being present to the moment is the best way to be in a state of non-resistance, not wishing everything was different. It's like, okay, well, this is here now. Let me meet this with my higher energy. What is God asking of me? Am I to stay? Am I to go? Am I to hold sacred space for this individual or these individuals? Or am I to remove myself from this location? Am I to take some deep breaths and hold the high watch? What am I to do? So, in the chapter, it's interesting at the very end, it talks a lot about listening to that voice and going into the silence. Deepak Chopra called that listening for the gap. It's like listen to the space between the thoughts to start dialing into that divine in you instead of the way our mind goes all the time, or I'll say the way my mind goes all the time. I'm sure we all have that to a degree, that our mind is thinking, and to get to divine will and to get to non-resistance, we're going to have to slow down the thinking, pause, reflect, breathe, be at peace. And then we let that divine energy kind of rise up in us and inform us about what is next. What are we to do? What is the lesson? What is the highest call in this situation, right? So hopefully that will help. And in the book, for those of you who get the book, there are a couple of journaling pieces in this chapter. And in several of the chapters, there are nearly every chapter, there's some journaling where it'll just be a few lines where you can start to differentiate, like literally write out, when was a time I could discern between ego and soul, and what did I choose? And so we learn, as we go and we keep doing the deeper spiritual work, what happens is we are able to more easily discern what that vibe and feeling of surrender is. Like I can tell when I'm in my personality and when I'm in the higher consciousness. I can feel it. Sometimes I can even hear it in my voice. It's a knowing, it's a presence. And ultimately what it becomes for me, and it says this in really big letters on page 135, the feeling of surrender is one of total trust and safety. I had a dear friend, and she gave me permission to mention this in the book, and her name is at the front of the book as acknowledgement of this story. But she told me a story many years ago. It was over 20 years ago, and it sat with me. It stayed with me. I just sat with it, and I've referred back to it so many times because of the strong wisdom in it. And this friend, she was a ministerial student before me, and going through school in her first year, she got very ill and had to leave school. And she was having this issue where out of the blue, she would just faint. She would just fall down and faint. And when the doctors would do blood tests and everything, they couldn't figure it out, blood sugar, all the normal things. She'd been to the ER. And finally, they checked her into the hospital to see if they could do some tests and get to the bottom of it. And they were not able to figure it out. She'd been there 3 or 4 days, and the chaplain went in. It just so happened the chaplain was a Unity minister and actually was in charge of the entire chaplain program for the hospital called CPE program. Anyway, and she went in and started talking to my friend and said, "What are you doing here?" And my friend said, "Well, I don't know." And she said, "Well, tell me what's going on." And so my friend described, the fainting, and she said, "Well, how do you feel when you faint?" And my friend said, "Scared, because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't want to hurt myself, and I'm afraid I'm going to die. I'm afraid that this is it, and I'm terrified, absolutely terrified." And so the chaplain said to her, "Well, it sounds like we need to work with the fear. And what I want you to do is the next time you feel like you're going to faint, I want you to imagine that you're falling into God. Just fall back into God. And that then, no matter what happens, you'll have the security, you'll have the knowingness, you'll have the trust that no matter what happens, you are in God. Just fall back into God. And that gave my friend a new awareness. And she was a minister, so she understood the spiritual at a deep, deep level. She had studied the spiritual her whole life. And within 24 hours of that meeting, she had come up with a new strategy for her food on her own, and she was no longer fainting. And she has not had that issue since that time in the hospital. And her phrase, she would say, is, I fall back into God. I fall back into God. So her surrender was both physical, it was mental, it was emotional, and it was spiritual. And she learned to trust that energy, to trust that fall, to trust that unknown as a place of safety and trust of the divine. So, my friends, that is the law of surrender. Trusting that God loves you, trusting that divine will move you forward, trusting that God's will for you is good, trusting that the whole universe is made to help you grow and evolve, and that as you trust at a very deep level, as you seek to discern, not my will, thy will be done, that you will be blessed. So my prayer for you, dear friend, as you go throughout your journey in this next week is to practice this work of surrender, fall back into God, and know God's got you, my friend. So thank you so much for joining us today. Again, to our friends in Kansas and my dear friend Terry, thank you so much for listening, being part of our family, and to all of you listening all around the world. We're grateful. We're blessed to have you along the journey with us, and look forward to seeing you next week. Blessings on the journey, my dear friends.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Experience of the Soul podcast with Cynthia Alice Anderson, helping you grow, prosper, and evolve. This podcast is made possible because of listeners and viewers just like you. If you would like to support the podcast with your tax-deductible contribution on an ongoing basis or through a one-time gift, head on over to experienceofthesoul.com/support. The Experience of the Soul podcast is copyright 2024 Cynthia Alice Anderson, all rights reserved, and is produced by Sean Kilgore. A production of the Soulworks Group, Incorporated.